Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Joyce Raimondo. I'm an artist and an author, and I am coming to you from my home and studio in East Hampton, New York. Now today we're going to do a project based on one of the most popular American artists, Georgia O'Keeffe. When I teach this class with you, I am not going to tell you exactly what to do step by step because you are going to have your own unique way of expressing yourself with color and line and form, but I am going to give you some tips and ideas of how we can get inspiration from Georgia O'Keeffe. So Georgia O'Keeffe was an American artist known for her floral painting. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe had a quote, and I'm going to read it. When you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, it's your world for a moment. I want to give that world to someone else. Most people in the city rush around so they have no time to look at a flower. I want them to see it whether they want to or not. So this project will help us slow down and actually see the beauty that's around us. And that's a gift for other people as they look at our painting. Georgia O'Keeffe would really zoom into the flower and make it larger than life so that it actually became abstract. And here are some roses, and you can see how when you get closer to the rose, it actually becomes more abstract. You see the pattern of the spiral and the pattern of the various petals rather than the edges of the flower. This is a painting project, and I'm going to give you some basic tips. If you don't have painting supplies, you certainly can draw. So what will you need? A pencil, something for your paper. I'm today using canvas board. You can also use paper or stretch canvas. You will need paints. Today I am using acrylic paints. You can also use tempera or watercolor or oil, which is a little more difficult. And I have various size brushes. Of course, that comes in handy. And this is a disposable palette. You can use a plate, you can use wax paper, anything that's not going to absorb the paint if you don't have a palette designed specifically for art. And of course, you'll need a rag or paper towels and water to wash your brushes. When you set up your palette, I want you to set up the palette in rainbow order. Don't just randomly put the colors. So I have white, yellow, red, blue, green, okay? From warm to cool colors, so when I go to mix, it's easy for me to find the colors. First thing, of course, choose your flower. You can work from a real flower, you can work from a photograph, or even I have some plastic flowers which come in handy. So I chose a sunflower. I'm not going to draw the whole edge of the flower. I'm going to zoom in and crop. So these petals are going to go right off the page. So I want you to face your flower so you don't have to continuously turn. And your point of focus should really be on the thing that you're drawing. And in this case, of course, it's a flower. So I want you to imagine that you're almost like an insect crawling around the edge of the contours of each petal, going very, very slowly so you can really observe and see that flower and translate it to the canvas. So don't just randomly draw a cartoon, just petals randomly of a flower. This does take a shift in your concentration away from simply naming rather, something to actually studying what you're looking at. You're not just saying, oh, that's a petal, and then drawing it. Now I'm going to draw the inside of the flower. So I'm not just going to do a circle because as you can see, it's not an exact circle. There's texture and lines and all sorts of patterns within the inside. I'm noticing there's all sorts of little lines, but they're irregular, right? It's actually quite beautiful. This is helping me to look at a sunflower that I buy all the time and I never bother to really carefully look. It's incredibly beautiful. Okay, so this will be my guide when I paint. So step 2, I'm going to start to lay in the color. When you paint, you don't want to finish one area of your painting and then go to the next and the next and the next. You want to have a layout so that you are creating your composition. And then you put more and more detail into it, but you don't just put such a detailed area in one corner and then go to the next spot. So we're going to put a wash over this. I'm going to use a lot of water so that I can lay out my darks and lights. And also, very important, the space that's in the background, that's called the negative space. That's just as important as the object that you're drawing. Okay? So I am going to use a fairly large brush for this, because this part I don't want to get too detailed with. So I'm going to water down my blue and just lay in here where my darks and lights are. So inside my my background is going to have some darks there, right behind the petals. So I'm kind of laying that in. And it's going to go from dark to light. And add a lot of water. Don't get too bogged down by this, because when you paint, you always want to be ready to change something. You don't want to get too locked down into one idea. So just keep it loose at this stage. And now, let's see, I'm going to look at my flower and realize that this central part is a very dark. And then this part around here actually has a lot of textures. The petals, as they overlap, of course, they create shadows. So I'm going to lay in some of the shadows. Now, the beautiful thing with this is, as you could see, this is going to be partly abstract and partly from observation. So you can improvise, and you certainly can change the original flower. Okay, so now I have a bit of a layout for the flower. And you might be wondering, well, why is she using blue? I like to use blue to create darks and lights. So that's going to be my starting point. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to layer some color over it. Now, we're going to start to paint the petals. And I am going to show you how you could create a nice transition from a darker color to a lighter color, and that's called a gradation. So right here on the inside of the petal, it's a little darker than the outer edge, and plus there's shadows with the overlaps. So I am going to capture that with some softness, and I'm going to translate that to my painting from a darker color here to lighter as the petals go from inside to out. Your flower might be completely different. So I am going to mix a little orange, because it's an orange yellow, but I'm actually going to exaggerate the orangeness of it for the inside. I'm going to start here, and I have a very fiery orange there, right? Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little more yellow, so it becomes not so orangey, it becomes more yellow. And now I'm going to add a little white, so it goes from a fiery orange to a yellow and a white. So here you can see the transition. That's called a gradation. Now if you want to make it smooth, you can use one of these fan brushes or any larger brush and then very, very gently smooth it out. So it's actually really beautiful and enjoyable, and you can see the transition there. Okay? Now, I'm going to create variety, so I don't have to do every single petal the same because that could get monotonous. And this is abstract art, so you don't have to copy the flower exactly. But we want to get, right now, practice some soft edges. So right here, again, starting with some red and making it more orange. And this part, as you'll see, I'm adding a lot of water because this is really the first layer of my painting. Because again, I'm kind of laying out where the darks and lights will go. It's starting to look pretty, isn't it? Now back here, this flower, this petal, I'm going to make that one much, much darker so these other two pop. And I'm going to add more red, even though technically in a sunflower you might not see red. And sometimes with these floral paintings, as in George O'Keeffe's painting, depending on how you paint the flower, it really is going to have different emotional qualities. So this one sort of is, I don't know, it might actually be coming out like a little bit of a burst of sunshine and energy, which is good. Kind of need that today. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to my light yellow here. And right in here, I am going to give it an even darker edge. And that's going to make it pop even more. When you have a dark edge, of course, against a light edge, it's going to pop. I'm putting a little blue in for that. And I'm not outlining. Okay, this is not an outline. It's an edge is different than an outline. So do you see how there's a shadow in the background? And I will make that a little more detailed later. Okay? So what I want you to notice in your picture, you have soft transitions like this. And then you also have hard edges where there's a light light against a dark dark. That could be called a highlight against an accent. And that's going to make it pop and give you space. To start laying in my color, and I am exaggerating. I am putting a deep, deep red towards the inside, but that's going to change when I layer over it. So you can start laying out your composition with your colors. and it's not about following rules. It's really about focusing and letting one mark lead to the next. Sometimes there's a physical element involved, which is, for me, rhythm and sort of the movement of my hand as I move from one part of the canvas to the other. For me, that's kind of a natural rhythm. And when you're one with the painting, you sort of intuitively know what to do. Okay, and when you get stuck, you can always step back and look at it from far away. So now I'm going to do the inside of the flower. Okay, and this is called stippling. And this is really my first layer with this, okay? And then in my flower here, I am going to look, I see this is a dark, then it gets light, and then there's all these little lines. So I'm actually gonna take a thin brush for that. And if you wanna make a very dark color, you can mix blue, red, and green, and you'll get a nice dark. So generally speaking, painters don't use black out of the tube, at least not in traditional painting. So you can create your own dark. And you see how I'm laying in the colors. And the direction of the brush strokes is not random. The direction of the brush strokes goes with the direction of the form of the item that I'm painting, right? So in this case, it's in to out, right? Or out to in. It's not just random. Now, the negative space is the space behind the object that you're painting. There's no such thing as empty space on a canvas or blank space. Every part of the canvas is equally important. So what I'm going to do is I want the flower to pop. So I'm going to put some very, very darks right in here. And I'm going to create those dark, I'm going to create hard edges. So I think this is kind of beautiful. Don't just start to fill in and color. So don't sort of switch to a mode and say, oh, well, now I'm on the background, so I'm just going to take one color and I'm just going to color it in, and that's that. I want you to think as much about the background as you did about the foreground, or as much about the negative space as you did about the positive space. So let's just say, for example, as I am creating these accents in here, I am going to make that go from a dark and blend into a nice, cool, light color. See what that looks like. So now I'm creating a contrast between that bright yellow, right? And that really almost like a slate purplish color back there. And that's what I want you to think about. Is the background going to be a color that's similar to your flower? In which case it will have a softness. If it has a lot of contrast like mine, it'll create more of a pop and maybe make it look a little more energized. Okay, do you see? This is the first layer of this painting. I am going to go back into this another day and add more texture and more layers into the paint so that the canvas, the grain of the canvas doesn't show as much and the paint itself is not as watery. But this is a good start, I think. Wash over my painting, and now I am going to look at it and see what does it need, and also start to thicken the paint so that there's more layers of paint. This is really just an underpainting right now. So I am going to continue to deepen some of these darks over here. I'm a person, I tend to like contrast, but you might want to make yours really, really soft. Just make sure if you have a petal next to another petal and so on, if the colors are all so similar and there's absolutely no contrast, the viewer is not going to actually be able to see the petals. So you want to make sure that you have enough contrast to see the edges of the petals. It doesn't have to be, of course, as deep as mine. So this type of painting is a form of improvisation, so don't be afraid to change it as you go along. In my case, I made this shape here solid. I wound up putting this dark rim around the edge and changed the colors of the sunflower itself. So you're using your observation of the flower as a springboard for creativity. You can change the colors, you can change the shapes, and you can even add things to your picture that weren't there at all. Second off, I want you to notice the gradation from the soft red, orange to yellow, and then adding a bit of white. Whereas over here, I have a dark background against a white. So you don't have to paint every petal and every edge exactly the same. And of course, I cropped the sunflower going off the edge. And in this case, I made the petals a little bit longer to come out to the edge. Now, another project you might want to do using nature, inspired by George O'Keeffe, is you can apply the same technique painting shells. And you can look at the patterns that you see in shells. Often, like in this one, you have a spiral pattern. And sometimes, of course, on other kinds of shells, you have a fan-like pattern. So you could pull those out and zoom in and crop so that the emphasis of the painting is on the shapes and colors and lines rather than on a realistic shell. So I hope that you enjoyed this lesson and create your painting your own way. Thank you.